I decided to teach English in a really weird way. I was a bio pre-med major, and I loved science, but I hated the math. And when the math got a lot harder, then I could not keep up. But I was always an English major. So I decided I would just switch that, and then I eventually gave up science. But when I finished my English degree, I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. And so at first I thought I would go into advertising because people were doing that in the 90s. And then I worked at an advertising company as an intern for 2 weeks, and I hated it. And then I realized, what do I really like to do? I like to read books and talk about them with people. So I thought I would go into teaching. So that's how I became an English teacher. I never in a million years thought I would be a teacher of any kind. But I thought I would do it for maybe a few years, and then here I am 16 years later. To me, reading, well, I'm biased, right? So to me, reading is something that most Americans do every single day, whether it's reading a stop sign. Most Americans read some kind of news source, and most Americans that I know read for work, like they have to read some kind of things for work. So what I do is pretty important in that I don't always teach like grammar or deconstructing each sentence, but I think just being able to discuss what you read is more important than almost anything else that I can teach students how to do. I can't imagine a day without me reading something substantial, and not even just at school. So usually, and maybe I'm just super nerd, but usually I read the equivalent of like half a book a day. And I read magazines, which are kind of like junk food reading. I usually read about half a book a day. So I used to keep lists of all the books that I read, and after a while I just stopped that. I can't imagine not reading for pleasure every single day. It's weird to me when students say like, I never read for fun, because I can't even imagine not doing that. It's hard for me. And then I of course read for school too. And even though students don't believe it, I read every book even though I've taught them. Like mostly 8 years in a row, I read every book with students as I do it. And every single time I get something new out of a book. So my most favorite books in the past 5 years, Jose Saramago's The Gospel According to Jesus Christ, which I love his writing. It's sort of fantasy and reality, and they're historically based books. And I teach the Bible and literature, so I'm really into the life and times of Jesus. That book to me was so amazing that I made space in my Bible and Lit class to teach it, and it's a almost 500-page novel. So I had to clear a lot of things. That's how great I thought this book was. So there's that. His language is amazing. And then there's also this book by Salman Rushdie. And I know a lot of students read Haroun and the Sea of Stories and hated it. I've actually never read that book. But Salman Rushdie wrote a book called Midnight's Children, which is historically based, and the language is so amazing. It's like every sentence I read was like poetry, and I wanted to go back and reread it and reread it. And it was actually one of the most difficult books I've read in my adult life. It was really hard to read because there were just like so many stories that connected, which I love. So I read that book, and I was so excited that I called up Dr. Hodges this summer after I read it, because I knew that she had read it, and we met so we could go talk about it over a Zumba class. But sometimes we do some Zumba. But we discussed that book, and then I just stopped, and I thought, like, this is what I want my students to do. I want them to be so into a piece of literature that they're, like, excited to talk about it. And that always reminds me of, like, why I do what I do. Because I want guys to be excited about reading anything, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or the newspaper or a trashy magazine. Just to be excited about reading something is really important to me. Also, when I taught Jose Saramago's The Gospel According to Jesus Christ, that was one of the most exciting books that I taught to students, because I wasn't sure how students were going to take it. And they, for the most part, they really, really loved it. So that's always exciting. They tell you to never teach a book that you love, because students who hate it will kill it for you. And it's like a big risk. You know, like you don't want to share something that you really love if people are going to hate it. But I took a risk on that book, and it paid off. This is really nerdy. So I went to the People of Color Conference in December, and one of my favorite authors, Diaz, was there. He was a speaker. And Dr. Hodges also really loves him, and she got us front row seats. So we were literally right in front of him, and he was talking about the book he had just written and just about writing in general. And I was a little starstruck, and I usually don't get like that. And that was pretty memorable. Got a picture taken with him. thought was cool. I don't usually like meet authors. To me, if you don't get to experience the world, you read about it or see it, and I'm not a visual artist and I'm not a media teacher. So to me, reading about the world is the best way to experience it if you can't actually go out and be in it. Like a lot of high school students just aren't out in the world yet. So to me, it's a window to the world, which is super important. That's how I learn. I mean, that's how I learn it, and I assume that's how a lot of people learn. So I read things, I talk about things, I see things, and I do things. And so those are the 4 ways I learn. And so without reading, I don't understand how the rest fits.